Welcome back, guys. If you remember in the last episode, we sewed the yoke and the sleeves and we started to attach the lining. But we can't finish the lining until we've inserted the invisible zipper. But we can't insert the invisible zipper until we've made a skirt. So today we are going to construct our skirt and insert the invisible zipper, and we'll also be attaching the skirt to the bodice so that in the next video we can finish up everything. We can attach our lining, finish off our sleeves, all those little fine details. Thankfully, this part is relatively easy. I mean, if you've already sewn set-in sleeves, sewing a skirt is going to be a cinch. So if you're following our design, which has an additional tulle layer to sew on top of the skirt, we need to attach that first. And it's just like how we constructed our bodice with the tulle layer on top. We're going to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire skirt with the tulle on top. So that'll attach the tulle, and it'll also set our seam allowance, which will come in big handy later on, and you'll know why once we insert the invisible zipper. However, since the skirt is a bigger piece of fabric, it's going to be a little trickier to make sure that that tulle layer doesn't shift out of place. So one, we are going to pin like a madman, and then we are going to strategically sew. Oh, and by the way, pardon my nails. I found these really cute Halloween Sally Hansen nails, and I just couldn't say no, but they're glow in the dark, so I just couldn't help myself. Anyways, let's get into this and we'll sew the skirt first. We're going to attach the tulle using the same basting stitch that we've been using, a 5/8 inch seam allowance, in a certain order that is less likely to shift your fabric, if that makes any sense at all. So first, we're going to sew the waistband. Remember to pick up your presser foot and shift your fabric when you get to the center point. Now you want to sew about 1/3 down the one edge of your fabric, then stop. Now we're going to sew on the other side of the skirt. But because it's the opposite side, the edge doesn't line up against that 5/8 of an inch seam allowance unless we sew from the bottom up, which seems a little counterintuitive, but I promise it'll work. So I'm going to start about 6 inches down and basically sew up toward the waistband. Then I'll go another 6 inches down the edge and sew upward again. Repeat the process until the whole edge is sewn. Now you can go back to the other side, remember the one that we stopped 1/3 of the way down, and finish the seam. I don't know why this method works, it just does. I've tried it a couple different ways, but this is the one that had the least amount of shift. And all you'll do is repeat the exact same steps on the two back skirt pieces. Now let's sew the skirt together. At the center back of those two back skirt pieces, you'll notice two different pattern markings, a 3-notch marking and a large circle marking. The 3 notches are your standard matching points. The circle marking represents the start of your invisible zipper. So I will pin all of the seam allowance below the skirt because I'm gonna sew that all together just like any other seam. But all of the fabric above the circle, I'm gonna leave unsewn for now. So you can sew this together with your standard zigzag stitch and stretch needle, the same as we've been using. Just as we did when constructing the bodice. And now we need to attach the center front skirt to the two back pieces. Again, you'll have the matching points on each side of the center front skirt to match up with the back pieces. Pin these points first. I always like to pin my notches. Then pin the rest of the seam. Take to your sewing machine and sew the whole seam. You should have a skirt with the center back opened at the top for our invisible zipper, which we'll get to later. Now we need to attach the skirt to the bodice. So flip the bodice on top of the skirt, right sides together, and match up that circle marking point and pin through. See how this kind of looks similar to when we were attaching the yoke? Then match up the notches to each side of the center point Just like with the yoke and the bodice, you'll have a little area of folded fabric at the center points. Just work around it for now. Continue to pin the rest of the skirt to the bodice. You want to spend some time molding the bodice and the skirt together, making sure everything is lined up correctly. You want to really make sure that that center front of the skirt has a nice line to it. You know, you don't want anything to look a little wonky or uneven on one side. So if you need to kind of pin and repin and kind of manipulate it until you get the right fit, that is totally fine. And you'll probably have to do it because I had to do it. So remember that fold that formed at the skirt center? Snip about 1/4 of an inch into that fold and you'll see how it lays better and kind of spreads open and fits just a tad bit better. Don't go any more than 1/4 of an inch because we don't want to risk cutting into the seam allowance. Now let's sew this whole thing together. Right now you'll notice I'm sewing with a straight stitch. That's just because I forgot to switch over to my zigzag stitch. My fault. So make sure you're using that standard zigzag stitch that we've been using. I'm starting my seam at that center point and sewing outward. It's really important that the center point is crisp and even, so I'm gonna start my stitch there. You can definitely start and back stitch into that seam allowance as well. Make sure to stop and reposition as needed so that the seam allowance is still 5/8 of an inch at all times. Now you want to flip the skirt around and sew down into that point from the other side. Because I've paid special attention to make sure the front of my dress, that center point, is crisp and sewn well, I can really start at the back and sew toward the front without risking anything shifting. I'm sewing from the back to the front because my pins are on this side of the fabric and I don't want to flip my dress over and sew from the other side because it would mean moving all the pins to the other side, and I just kind of want to keep everything consistent. So this is what it looks like when it's all sewn together. It has a nicely shaped waist, which I love. And when we flip, it looks great. Now we need to put in the invisible zipper. When you take it out of the package, it has a couple wrinkles that need to be ironed out. Make sure you do not have your steam setting on, but you can definitely use high heat. Just make sure to always keep the iron moving or it will melt the plastic teeth. Once you get those wrinkles out, you need to kind of flatten out the zipper coils, if that makes any sense. Basically, we're trying to push the teeth to one side so we can see more of the tape. Again, always keep your iron moving. I really try to just focus in on the point of my iron. Now, if you've never inserted an invisible zipper before, I suggest watching our Beginner's Guide to Sewing episode 12, which has a detailed step-by-step how-to on invisible zippers. So the best way I found to understand how to insert an invisible zipper is to just visualize how it looks when it's actually inserted. I kind of put it into the seam and think, what needs to happen for this to work? This side folds under and attaches here, and then I flip it and pin it. But really, if you've never done this before, please go watch episode 12 because it's really helpful. Anywho, my zipper is going to start at the top of my center back bodice piece, about 3 to 4 millimeters below the yoke and bodice seam. I'm starting at 3 to 4 millimeters below the seam because I want to sew a hook and eye closure right above the zipper later, just like you see on ready-to-wear skirts and dresses. So I'm lining up the actual teeth of the zipper along my basting stitch. Remember those 5/8 of an inch basting stitches we did on all the bodice pieces? Since you've already marked these, pinning the zipper is super easy and you don't really have to measure anything. So just pin with the teeth lined up on top of the basting stitch. I know it may seem tedious, but I don't want to speed this part up because I want those beginners to see that it really does take a bit of time and precision to get this lined up properly. If you're already comfortable with invisible zippers, you can just, fast forward. So as I get to the end, I want to pin as close to that zipper tab as possible. And then I'll do the exact same thing on the other side. I'm going to match up the clear plastic stoppers to make sure that they are lined up perfectly and that the end of the two back pieces are symmetrical. Then again, I do my little reverse engineering thing. I'm gonna just zip this up and think, does this look right? And envision how it's supposed to look when it's finished. Looks right to me. So I'll unzip and flip the zip over to the other side of the dress opening. And here we go, we'll just pin like before. Again, we're really focusing to make sure the teeth line up with the basting stitch. Again, I apologize for spending so much time on this part, but I know invisible zippers can be a real source of anxiety for some. And like I said, totally skip ahead if this is nothing new to you. So this part takes a bit of time. Try not to rush through it. In the end, you'll get a better result. You probably get the point now. Again, just get as close to the zipper tab as you can. Pop that little pull tab to the outside of the dress, and there you go, all pinned. Now, if that wasn't already enough work, now we need to hand sew it in place. It really makes sure everything ends up looking perfect and you don't have to fudge around with pins while you're sewing. Just some long tacking stitches is all you need. It only takes a few minutes. So the goal is to have my needle perforate right along this area right here. Now pop on an invisible zipper foot. I'm using a straight stitch and I still have my stretch needle in. So I want my needle to be right up against this zipper coil, but I don't want it to actually hit the coils. If you're nervous, err on the side of caution and stitch a little further away. Again, we have a video showing how to use the invisible zipper foot. If you need a little extra clarification, you just place the zipper coil into one of the little tunnels so that it will glide through effortlessly as you sew. Now sew down as close to that zipper tab as you possibly can. Now let's flip it and do it to the other side. The coils will go into the other tunnel. I have a tendency to press the coils down to the side as I sew. I'm not really sure if it actually helps, but it makes me feel like it does, so I just do it. Again, when you come to the end, sew as close as you can. All finished, looks like a regular old seam. From this angle, it looks like my back seams are a little uneven, but I promise they aren't. They're totally lined up nicely. All right, congratulations. You have inserted an invisible zipper, you've sewn a skirt, you've attached it to the bodice. It's actually looking like a dress. Now all that's left is to really do those fine-tuned touches, you know, putting in the slit, which is completely optional, finishing off the cape, which is gonna be super easy because it's just tulle fabric, and finishing off our neckline, sleeves, all that jazz. Super easy. It's really not gonna take that much longer. I'll try to get the videos done as fast as I can. I apologize for these being so late. Again, I'm so sorry and thanks for sticking it out with us. Oh, we just have one more video left. We'll be finishing everything up and I can't wait to see how everyone else did their Elsa costumes. If you have them finished, if you just like skipped ahead and did your whole thing, be sure to send us pictures. I would love to see what everyone else is doing and how their designs look. Okay, well, I'll see you next time. Bye.